This conversation originally premiered at CFF on Thursday, March 21st, 2024 to a live theater audience. Join us today on an imaginative journey to explore the dynamic relationship between content and form in the boundless world of animation. The following filmmakers will give us valuable insights into their animation process, from initial concept to final fruition. Cheers, Courtney Wolfson, Sam Chou, and Kjell Boersma. Welcome to the fest.
So yeah, thanks for coming, everybody. This is fantastic. We're super excited. So my panelists, I'm fortunate enough to already be familiar with both of them, but Sam Chou, disclosure here, full disclosure, I've worked with Sam for the last couple of years on In the Heat, which is in this festival. And Kjell, I got the pleasure of meeting a couple years ago at a Taffy event, and his film is Boat People, which screened yesterday, right? Yeah, yesterday. So that Boat People is a 9-minute short film collaboration with Tao Lam, and it's a beautifully told story of Tao Lam's personal experience fleeing Vietnam and as a refugee coming to Canada with his parents. And that was an NFB production. Also worked with the DGC and ACTRA and the WGC. And yeah, Homegrown Shorts 2 block and amongst very other fantastic films as well. And Sam Chou is the director of In the Heat. It's a 16-minute short film from the anthology series Red Iron Road, which I and my team have been producing at Lakeside Animation, and also in collaboration with Look Mom Productions, which is the animation arm of Blue Ant Media. And that also we worked with the ACTRA Talent Union for that one, and that had a great screening last night ahead of Place of Bones, which is also a fantastic film. I loved it. What I love about that is how different these two films are from each other. Couldn't be more different tonally and creatively, aesthetically, everything. So since animation is not that frequently featured here at the festival, I'd love to kind of just get like a overview, I guess, and I'm sure everyone here is probably very interested in how we do this. It was different from all these live action wonderful pieces. So Kjell, I'd love to start with you. So both of these films feature some amount of traditional and classical animation, and just for purposes of terminology, I'm kind of going to use those terms interchangeably. Classical animation, traditional animation, it's the same kind of Disney Bambi style where everything is hand drawn, all frames are hand drawn, but we are talking about digital drawing, not so much on the cell paper like before. But with Kjell's, I believe, has a mix of different mediums, including some practical textures as well. And so, yeah, I love that, especially how the forest was made in the beginning. I would love to hear more about the hybrid of techniques that you've used for Boat People, and yeah, tell us more about that.
Yeah, so our starting point for the film stylistically is Tao's illustration work. She's a children's author illustrator, so this was her first foray into animation. So yeah, I mean, my goal was really how do we translate her illustration style into animation. So I had a very clear idea of how I wanted to approach that. It would be as if each frame of the film was like a hand-constructed kind of piece in and of itself, like a panel in a book. And that proved to be really challenging. And so at the start, I kind of devised this process where we would laser cut each individual frame, all the layers of the clothes and everything, and then assemble them by hand and then stop motion photograph them. And that just proved to be way too time consuming. So basically what we ended up doing is, it was also really important to me to have the classical animation approach, because that's kind of the way that Tao approaches her illustration work is, each panel or each frame is approached kind of uniquely. So you're not limited by, the rigs that you have, or like she's not making paper dolls and then positioning them. It's like each one is approached in a unique way. So being able to have that kind of fluidity and I guess be very dynamic with the camera and with what the characters were doing and how they were interacting was really important. And so, yeah, the classical approach was kind of really integral to that. So basically with the traditional animators, their deliverables were like a very polished rough, but not as clean as you would do in like a tie down process. And then we used harmony rigs to do the cleanup process basically. So very malleable rigs, very simple but malleable rigs, so that they could be stretched kind of into whatever shape we needed based on the traditional animation. And then within the rigs are a bunch of different layers. So there's like the texture layer, which is the scanned, Tao would make hand printed or ink on paper prints for the textures. And then we had this very complicated process for basically depth maps with gradients, which was another level in the rigs. Yeah.
So complicated. I'm super interested, but also like, whoa, how?
Yeah, very painfully.
Painful, slow process, I'm sure. Yeah. Well, it's really come together. Interesting to tie those styles together as a combination of stop motion and like these paper rigs and 2D traditional and character rigs. Like that's a lot to handle in one project. Yeah, that's great. And how about you, Sam? Tell us about your experience, both I guess as a director and also designing for a film that was traditionally drawn.
Yeah, our film is 100% hand drawn. I know it sounds very daunting. It is daunting, but our animators are fantastic and they love doing it. And I love doing it. But yeah, that's the aesthetic we chose. With speaking of style and visual aesthetics, that's the first thing I examine whenever I'm tackling a project: is what is the look of the film. And because I have roots in traditional animation, I tend to lean towards traditional, hand-drawn. I just like the look of it, I've done CG, I've done Flash type stuff, but I always seem to gravitate towards that hand-drawn look. Does that answer the question?
So?
Yeah. No, this is... So, I don't know if this is a thing with all artists, but I have a lot of imposter syndrome when it comes to my designs. Yeah. Whenever I'm tasked with designing my own characters, I end up hating them, and then production kind of drags on for me. It's not my drawings are not interesting to me, so I hire designers that inspire me. In this case, we hired a guy named Axel Maillot from Paris, and there's something about those French designers, French animation students that really just light a spark in me. So we hired Axel to do some designs, and I love his drawings. And that way it keeps it interesting for me. Every frame is interesting because they're not my drawings.
Yeah, it's a very unique look that he came up with as well, with like the eyes and the shape of the face. It's not something so typical for animated designs.
Yeah, well, we chose, I mentioned this yesterday, when we think of animation in North America, we think of big eyes, Disney eyes with a glint, right? And you can see all the detail, sharp chin and perky nose and happy faces. But this is not that kind of story, right? I did 10 years of commercial animation, which we were dealing with Tony the Tiger and, the Snap, Crackle, Pop. Everything had to be appealing and happy. But with this kind of tone, this kind of story, we want to make sure that the visual tone reflects that. And so we chose a designer that was a little bit weird. I think we did a good job.
Yeah, it seems so. I also want to throw it out there, since this is a Cheers and Chats format at this panel, we're welcome any questions from the audience at any time. Of course, we can do some at the end as well. But if anybody has any questions to jump on to what these creators are talking about, feel free to ask. Oh, I do see a hand up right there.
Correct, yes. We hand draw with a Cintiq, which is like a electronic tablet, and you have a pen, and you can just draw literally on the screen. They're very expensive.
How long it takes to create the short films? Great question.
First.
So Tao and I started talking about doing this project, I think in 2017 or 2018. And then I think we spent about a year applying for grants, Arts Council grants, when we didn't get anywhere with that. And then eventually we got a meeting with Anita Lee, the executive producer at the NFB, and that was, I think, in 2019. And then we went through kind of a lengthy development process with the NFB, and then we got greenlit for production in 2020, right at the start of COVID, which wasn't a great timing. And then we were in production until I think we finished November of 2022. So 2 pretty solid years of animation.
Was most of that, let's say, like preparing the assets and preparing, like making the paper textures and the paper figures and things like that, or was it mostly the digital aspect of it?
Yeah, we went kind of in phases. So there was the principal animation, which was the traditional animation process. But before that, we had like a very robust animatic, I would say.
Very helpful.
Yeah.
Very important.
Yeah.
An animatic, for anyone who doesn't know, is kind of like a blueprint for the film. It's mostly taking the storyboards, married with the recorded dialogue, and then putting it all together, cutting it to time, but it's all just pictures until we fill it in with the actual animation that you see on screen.
Yeah, and so we really spent a long time with the animatic. That was probably what we spent most of the time of the whole project on, was getting that really nailed down. Kind of tail end of it was like the rendering process, because after we worked in the harmony side of things, we took it into Cinema 4D to do the actual rendering of to make it with the lighting and have it kind of give it the depth and everything. And that took a really long time as well.
It's like the whole gamut.
Yes.
And Sam, how long did we spend on In the Heat?
Production, I thought, was pretty quick, but I think the interesting thing is before the whole thing started, we actually, Ellery and I, Ellery is my writer and collaborative partner for many years, we were trying to break out the story that Lakeside was trying to figure out. It was In the Heat, and the only premise was this is Santa Claus. There's Santa Claus, he's being interrogated for the murder of a child. And that was the basic premise that was being floated around amongst Lakeside. Before Ellery and I got involved in it, we were trying to figure out a way to get, to pitch this project back to Lakeside. It's Lakeside's project, we're going to pitch it back to Lakeside, but a complete story. So it took us around 7-8 months to figure out the story, because you can't just have Santa in an interrogation room being interrogated. There's no story there. So Ellery and I would have kind of monthly chats, like, what if we try this? What if we try that? What if we, but it never hit something. It never hit. By the way, who saw the film? I don't want to spoil anything, or maybe I will. Okay.
It screened last night.
Yes.
If anyone was there.
Okay, I'm going to spoil it for you. At the end, okay, the premise is there's a man dressed as Santa Claus, and we don't know if he's Santa Claus, and he's being grilled by detectives. At the end, it's revealed that he actually is Santa Claus, and he called in the detectives on purpose, the specific detective on purpose. That was when we threw that out the wall, we were like, oh, that's kind of like The Departed. Santa, planted a seed, an agent, and have this cop rise in the ranks only to be his protector. So we thought it was kind of funny and interesting. And once we got that going, and that was around the 7-month mark, we were like, okay, great, let's do that and let's pitch it. And we pitched it, and we were lucky that everyone from Lakeside responded and said, yeah, great. And they wanted to produce it internally through the Lakeside machine. And I was absolutely thrilled. From records to recording the actors, or the voice actors, to storyboarding it, to creating the animatic, the blueprint, that was around 3 months, I think. And then I hate to say this, but I don't remember the rest of the production. It was, time blurred. It was also during the tail end of COVID. But Courtney, you should know.
I should know, but I also don't remember.
I think 9 months to do all the animation.
Must have been something, around 7 months. It's kind of typical.
Cocaine, what?
Yeah.
Yes.
I just know our completion date is March 1st, 2023. Yes. That's the number I have in my head. But I think it was probably around 7 months of production, and then another month or so in post after that, finishing up the sound design with our composers, Brett Carruthers and his team as well. Yeah, that was pretty awesome. So I'll definitely ask you to talk more about post and music in a little bit. Mm-hmm. But I want to talk about like the themes that each of these films explore. But since we were kind of talking on a bit of a production tangent, maybe I'll just ask about the different types of production pipelines, I suppose, that might have been involved here. We kind of heard a little bit about this already from Kjell with the gamut of styles and materials to work with. So Sam, maybe what you could tell us a bit about, from your perspective as a director, experienced director working with production companies such as Look Mom, as you're the creative director at Look Mom Productions, and working with a company like us at Lakeside and other companies that you may have collaborated with in the past. Like, how is this process for you, like as a director?
Yeah, this has been a really rewarding process. I've been a series director for a while, and usually when you are a series director, similar to live action, you aren't the creator of the series, right? You are given you're given a lot on your plate creatively. I always equate it to being a chef, but you don't get to choose your ingredients, right? That's a series director. I find I work with Janfield, I work with Yowza. Their pipelines are always really robust, but when you're working for a broadcaster, they're looking for a very specific thing. And happy to give it to them, but in Lakeside's case, there was a real camaraderie, there was a real crossover with what Lakeside wanted and what I wanted. And it was great to be heard. It was great to be able to inject ideas frequently and freely without having broadcasters say, we're not budgeted for that, or we don't. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's actually, that's very true for the audience as well. Like it's just such a unique thing. Television compared to features and shorts. It's when you do have a broadcaster involved, it changes everything. It's like you have a new director basically, or a parent in the room.
There's one thing I want to add as well too. That's all hand drawn, and I haven't done a hand drawn short completely for 10 years. And I think before that, I think we were all struggling to think of what's the last hand-drawn thing we've seen. So just to be able to work with Lakeside on something hand-drawn like that was incredibly rewarding. Mm-hmm. It was a rarity, and especially the subject matter and the tone of that short. That's a rarity in Canada. So I'm truly blessed.
Great. And sorry. Yes, the question. Hi. You want to repeat the question?
The question is, as an actor, how much say do they have in their performance and their ideas in the overall production? That's a good question. We knew that, in terms of casting, we had to hire someone with the right tone that could deliver the lines. When we hired Santa Claus, or the man dressed as Santa Claus, who turns out to be Santa Claus, we hired somebody that had a lot of bass in their voice and could do the ho 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 thing, right? That we all know. But Michael Dobson from Vancouver, he's the voice actor, incredible voice actor, is no stranger to a lot of kids' entertainment as well too. He brought in this weird accent that you end up hearing. He has a bit of I don't even know how to describe it. It's a weird little, and Ellery and I, the writer, we were like, do we need that? Why don't we just go regular English? But regular English, accent or a Canadian, or not Canadian, North American accent. But he insisted that we try it again. It's not exactly a European accent. It's not a Western accent. It's something.
Yeah, it's a Santa accent.
It's a Santa accent. So he fought for it and in the booth, and we gave it a try. Wow. And we okay, sure, let's do that. Wow. Let's do it. And one of the detectives, we hired this guy named Josh Peace, who's a Torontonian, and he put on this Bill Burr kind of impersonation, and we loved it. We loved it. That's the asshole cop right there. That's the Bill Burr accent.
And now we get asked all the time, how did you get Bill Burr?
During screening, someone leans over to me and goes, how did you get Bill Burr on this?
Every time, I swear. Are there any other questions at the moment? So if from someone who has no animation experience, how do you go about getting a project produced with, as a fully animated project? Whoa. Do you guys want to take a stab at that?
I've been struggling with the same question for most of my career. I think
everybody struggles at that point, for their first at the start, right?
Yeah.
That's something everyone goes through that. Yeah.
Even with 10 years of experience of being an animator for 10 years, working on feature films, it's very hard to convince somebody, a financier to finance your film. Most of the films, I'm not sure if this is going to help you much, but before anyone would invest in me, I had to invest in myself. So the first 3 films I did myself were completely self-financed. I had a background in animation, so I can animate, but I actually hired outside storyboard artists to do that. I'd hired, as I said, I don't like my designs, so I hire a designer, and I try to do it as cheap as I can, because I was at the beginning of my career, no experience. Let's put as much money as I can to see what I can get in return. And, the films went out there in the world, and they did okay, but it's a process of it's a process of continuously doing that until you reach a point where my films started hitting TIFF, and then they played at Sundance, and then they got more and more, and so it ends up snowballing. At this point, just a couple years ago, somebody reached out saying, I saw your film at Sundance, do you want to work on this? So only now I'm getting I could see the fruits of my labor. Going back to your point, sorry, I'm long-winded. You have to invest in yourself and work at it and try your best to do things on the cheap, right? Whatever skill you have, work that 300%. If you're a designer, or if you know how to animate, or if you know how to storyboard, at least do that part. Otherwise, it's impossible to get anyone involved if you're not willing to put in any other work.
And I would add, just like live action filmmaking, it's a team, very much a team collaborative effort. Like there's no one who can do it all in a vacuum. It takes multiple people to wrangle everything together, from the financing to the final art to the directing, everything. So yeah, definitely. And I know our chief creative at Lakeside, Matt Lyon, who's sitting in the audience right here, he'd be saying draw right now as a great place to start, right? Or pick the role that you feel that you are most passionate about, whether it's you want to be a director or you want to be the designer or the writer or a producer. Those are all really different skill sets. Sometimes, of course, some of us, especially in indie-sized companies, wear many hats, kill two birds with one stone kind of thing. But definitely, find an angle that you are most passionate about and invest in yourself to get your skills up to a level there, because especially for funding bodies across the board, they do rely heavily on the track record of the applicant. So they do want to see people with experience and with other partners with a track record of working together and what kind of successes they brought. So as a short, it's not going to be that easy to get funding unless you do have prior experience. So make that calling card film, make that first short film, do it whatever you can on the cheap yourself, just to get some experience under your belt and go from there, I guess. Like I as a producer now, I've literally started as a coordinator, as a reception desk, as an in-house PA, right? Like work from the bottom up. That's typically how it goes, unless you're very, very lucky. So speaking on, oh yeah, sure, yeah. Hi.
Did everyone hear that?
Trying to make a documentary and wondering about working with animation students and going to schools for a resource. Interesting. Yeah, I mean, of course, it's possible. A lot of,
I think that's a great idea.
Schools like Sheridan do have,
Seneca used to have I don't know if they still do it, but they have a really great program called the Animation Summer Institute. And that's my film before this one. We worked with that program, and they basically, they assigned us 5 students to work full time on the film over the summer. And we did come in with funding, but then they pretty much put as much resources into it as you bring in, kind of thing. I think it would be hard without any funding. And I think a struggle would be consistency if you don't do something like structured kind of like that. Yeah, it's hard to get consistency if you don't have the same people working on something for a long time.
We apply to the same grants as live action, and you just kind of got to talk about your project, I guess, and your project strengths the way that they are. There's some tax credits that might be more applicable for animated processes like designing and rendering and post-production and things like that. But for general financing, I think it's more or less the same.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is that the National Film Board is very animation focused, but that's kind of a very different way to go.
And also a rarity and a special one for Canada as well. Like I'm not sure what other other countries might have that would be similar. But that's a great segue as well, because I do want to talk more about the NFB, National Film Board of Canada. Because Boat People was produced with NFB, and Kjell, you've been working with the NFB for some time. I've actually never worked with the NFB before, so for me this is very interesting. Can you tell us a little bit about that process? Like you mentioned before about pitching and getting a green lit. How do they typically produce their films?
Yeah, it's a very different process than like the Arts Council method or like any of the real like funding bodies. You really have to get one of their producers interested in your film and to kind of champion it internally. So we were lucky. I had kind of a connection to the previous executive producer of the NFB, and I met with her and kind of told her about our project, and she said, oh, well, it sounds interesting. I'll like forward this email to the current executive producer at the NFB. And so we pitched her the project, and she saw something in it enough that she assigned one of the NFB producers, Justine Pimlott, to our film. And then so Justine worked with us through the development process to basically kind of get the project prepared for internally pitching it for a green light. And our situation was a little bit unique because we went through the Toronto studio. So the NFB has studios kind of throughout Canada. There's one in, I think, Halifax, and then like Vancouver, and there's like a northern studio, and they all do their own projects. But so the Toronto studio doesn't do much animation. They do mostly documentary. So that was like a little bit of an oddity. And so we did end up kind of becoming a co-production between Toronto and Montreal, which was really great because they have a lot of expertise. But it was, it's a long road to getting a green light, and it's quite demanding. They ask a lot, and obviously because they want the project to succeed, and so they want to have all of the best. They want to put their best foot forward when they have to pitch it to their producers.
What kind of materials do you have for the internal pitch process?
I'm trying to remember, because Tao and I had done quite a few proposals for Arts Council applications. So I think we had like rough storyboards, like an outline, and like kind of like a 1 or 2 pager document with some art examples. But we did, so normally, I think their stages they call it the investigate stage, which is like very preliminary, which you don't really have a clear idea, maybe just like you have kind of an inkling of what you want to do. And we skipped that stage and went straight to development, which is basically preparing a proposal for Greenlight. Whereas in Investigate, you're preparing a proposal for development. And so at the end of that, we were supposed to have like basically a locked animatic. We didn't exactly, we had like, it was not a production ready animatic, at least not that in the state that I wanted it ready for animation. But it was, like our shots were more or less locked, and the timing of the shots was more or less locked. We had our kind of runtime. And then, we also put together like a style guide, some animation tests. That's when I was doing all the laser cutting stuff. Basically, like everything that they're going to need to budget and schedule the film, and then convince everybody else there that it's worth doing.
How extensive were your animation tests? Like that is something that, typically, we do sort of put those into a pitch. Sometimes a little demo, if not a fully produced demo, then at least some samples or some sketches or something like that. Yeah. How did that work?
We had a really involved process because, like I said before, I had a very clear idea of how I wanted it to look, but I didn't know exactly how to get there. So we tried a lot of different things. And that's really like a huge benefit to working with the NFB is they're very supportive of that kind of research and development, and they really do want to.
Yeah, so they can pour resources into that even prior to greenlighting the film.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good. That's the important part that I was thinking about is doing a test and going into production, even if it's for 10 seconds or 30 seconds, like it's still going to pull resources. It still costs money, still creates effort, still needs a director. So there's lots of work there even prior to greenlight.
Yeah, and because the Ontario studio did not have a lot of experience with animation, that was a bit of a frustrating process to be like, well, it's only 10 seconds, but it's going to take me like months to to get there, and I have to try all of these different things to see which has like this kind of balance of what we want to get and being an efficient process and something that we can bring other people onto. So yeah, I spent so much time, and like development that process was funded, but I was putting in like way more time than was kind of sane, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's good. I can see some differences there with the NFB then. They assigned you a producer. That's pretty cool. And that's one thing that I guess a lot of filmmakers at the start, you have to go find who's the production person that's going to help you organize your whole shoot and help you raise money and. So that's nice to have it kind of handed to you.
Yeah, and we did kind of come in through the back door, but they do have an open submissions process. So anybody, you can find a producer on their website, look at what projects they've done, see if they might jive with what you want to do, and just email them. Try to have all your ducks as much in a row as you can, but then they are extremely busy. They're super overworked, but eventually somebody will get back to you.
And then on the distribution side as well, you were telling me earlier that is going to probably boat people will be on the NFB's website, and that's what tends to happen with a lot of the NFB productions. They have a whole catalog of their films that they've made, and they put them wherever. Can you talk a little bit about the distribution side from the NFB?
Yeah, I don't know a ton about what they do aside from they have their own kind of online streaming platform, which is publicly available to all Canadians. So that's really great that the film will live there. And a huge part of their mandate, aside from making films, is maintaining access to their films and their archive. They just have so much material, and if you ever have a chance to go to Montreal and visit their headquarters, you definitely should. It's an amazing space, an amazing facility. So much of what they do is restoring old film and making sure that all of these things that they've put resources into over the last 100 years are still accessible. So that's a really cool part of it, that the film will kind of be part of the record there. And then, but yeah, they have a festivals team and a marketing team, and it's been such a total difference from everything else I've ever done, where I'm doing all of that myself. And like kind of, you know, the last thing that you want to do after you burn yourself out making a film is like spend a bunch of money on festival submissions and like convince anybody that it was a good idea that you did this. So that's really been like the real highlight of the whole thing, is now like you have this basically like team of people who are championing the film and like really doing all that they can to get it out there and like saying all sorts of nice things about it. So yeah, that's
Yeah, from our experience on Red Iron Road, for sure. It's the marketing that you enter a new phase, right? Like once the film is finally done, you're like, yay, it's done, wrap party. And then, all of this work to get it out there and market it and make sure people see it. It's a whole nother job, and it's very time consuming and difficult. But yeah, lucky for us with the Red Iron Road, which Sam has directed 2 episodes now of. In the Heat is actually part of our season 2, and season 1 is now available on Amazon Prime in Canada and also on Plex and Tubi and Hoopla Digital and coming to Canopy as well. So we're very happy about that. But yeah, distribution is always, from any production company, it's always like it's hugely important. And so even if you're doing it yourself as an indie creator, or if you're working at a production studio, like somebody needs to own that role, right? And if it's not you yourself doing it, then you got to partner with somebody who's going to do a good job. And it's just one more big piece of the picture to think about, right? And rise of animation, especially CGI in the world, how does that affecting other work and opening our doors? Yeah. Miyazaki's
film opened this year's TIFF, and I thought that was a huge, huge thing. I don't know if TIFF has ever done that before, having an animated film open. So I love it. I love that his films or animated films are getting recognition. As for its repercussions, I don't see any negative. I don't see an oversaturation. Well, maybe with kids we're hitting that right now. But with adult, I don't think we've hit a saturation point yet.
It's definitely becoming more popular and recognized as a medium, not a genre. People used to consider, animation is mostly for kids. And sure, in Canada, we do most of the production we do in Canada is for kids animation. But now it's more and more, we see it a lot more often, especially with the kind of work that Lakeside is doing and what Look Mom is doing. It's more creating more content for adults consumption, comedies, dramas, horror, but animated in the animation medium. And so I'm very happy to see it. And I'm hoping that that's going to be more widespread as well. Great. So I'd love to talk a little bit about the themes that are present through both of these films, like Boat People being exploring themes of war, refugees, and using the ant metaphor to tell that story in a beautifully sensitive and dramatic tone, while In the Heat explores themes of Santa, Baba Yaga lore, and combined with the police detective procedural tropes and a dark comedy tone, like quite different films as well. So Kjell, I'll start with you. How is animation the best medium to tell this particular story that you and Tao have collaborated on? And how would animation serve the tone of the film as well?
The simplest answer in this case is that it was the best medium because this is the medium that Tao works in, and what we wanted to do was bring this story of hers in this style to the screen. I think more broadly, if we wanted to do this film any other way, it's like a period piece with animal characters and tons of other extras and storms at oceans and going inside anthills and stuff. This would be you'd need so much resources to do this kind of a film. I think every animated film it creates its own world and its own visual language, and I think if it's successful, you kind of suspend your disbelief and you enter that world as an audience member. And I think you can do such interesting things with even our film is quite simple stylistically, but I think you still do feel a connection to the characters. And I think that's a really magical thing about animation is you can have stuff that's barely representative or very pared down or just shapes and still convey emotion and all this stuff. And I think it really opens up a lot of storytelling opportunities. And, in a very practical way, again, there is a high barrier to entry for animation. You either need to have those skills yourself or you have to have resources. And live action, all you really need is, you can shoot a film on a smartphone and you need a lot less resources to just make something. But they with animation, it's almost you reach a ceiling of it doesn't matter then if you're your imagination is the limit as long as you get to that threshold of being able to support your animators. You can really do whatever you want.
Yeah, that's pretty key. Doing whatever you want is kind of the reason why anyone uses animation, I think, anyway. Sam, how about you? How is In the Heat, or why is In the Heat important to be an animated story?
Why is it important? Our film actually can be done in live action, the way it's designed. It can be.
Just hire Bill Burr.
We get Bill Burr, we get the real Santa Claus, we get Tim Allen and play Santa. It would have a completely different feeling if it was live action. Completely different. One thing that I worked on a series called Crime, the animated series, and one of the questions, it dealt with real life stories of crime, from perpetrators of crime, victims of crime, law enforcement. And somebody asked me, like, are we romanticizing crime? But like the answer to that is and similar to, and this goes back to our film, like it makes, like there's a lot of violence in the Heat. There's a lot of blood. And if you have it animated, it just makes it a bit more palatable. Does that make sense? It just makes it a bit more, nobody gets hurt, but you get to enjoy the visceral fun of it. And yeah, so I find when it goes through the filter of animation, certain topics, certain edginess, certain themes, just, they don't get watered down. They just get put into a filter where you can see it on a different level.
Yeah, even a couple of my friends who I was telling about the Red Iron Road series, I was like, well, I know that some of them don't really like horror content, but I want them to watch my series. So I'm like, I kind of apologize. I'm like, okay, there's going to be some moments where you're going to find squeamish, a little bit of gore here and there. And they're like, oh, well, it's animated gore, so it's okay, right? Yes, no cartoons were harmed in the making. Well, I think it's time to wrap up our panel. So thank you so much, Sam and Kjell.
Thank you, Courtney, Sam, and Kjell, for this lively discussion. We know that your visions will continue to animate the world in ways that will inspire beyond imagination. This chat was produced by Jen Pogue, Ashley Rains, and Vern Euler for the Canadian Film Fest. Music by Brett Higgins. The Cheers and Chats podcast is co-produced, edited, and sound mixed by Ryan Gordon. For more info on the fun happening now at CFF, find us at CanadianFilmFest.ca.